to go back to it. Now, going forward, we ask that a couple things be minded. So please mute your mics for any background noise, unless you are answering the question or saying the question or speaking. We also want to let you know that the chat feature is where we like for you all to utilize your questions and your interactions. So on the bottom of at the top of your screen, you might notice a hand symbol. That is the symbol which we're going to be using to acknowledge if you have a question, and we ask that you raise your hand as we're in this virtual space, or feel free to also use the chat feature to ask your questions. Again, with this event being recorded, you all will have access to this event again via through this team site. A lot of events for this month for Hispanic and Latinx History Month will be hosted on this team site, and we ask that you take full advantage to come back to it, see some of the presentations for later, or use it at your personal use. And last but not least, we ask that during this time period you stay engaged and feel free to speak your mind during this time period. Alrighty. So starting off with, I'd like first to introduce myself, and before we meet our panels, my name is Jide Carew, JC. I am program coordinator that works out of the Eastville campus, as well as on this call we have two of our other program coordinators and admin assistants. Ms. Jessica Sierra is on the call as well. So again, if you're having some technical issues or have some questions, please make sure to put it into the chats. So as we begin, I will first start by reading some of the intros and some of the bios of our panelists. So, and before we get started, I would like to ask for forgiveness in any butchering of the words, as haven't exactly learned how to roll my R's. So starting off with is Professor Ulises Rodriguez. Professor Rodriguez has been a full-time Spanish professor at Mountain View campus since fall 2006. He has also worked in several institutions of the Dallas College since 2000. Along with higher education institutions in Dallas metropolitan areas such as Collin College. He has worked as an educator in the state of Texas since 1996. He advises the Sigma Delta Mu Xi chapter of the Spanish Honor Society since 2007. He has inducted over an average of 25 students per year. And if you're interested in joining the Spanish Honor Society, we ask that you make sure to contact him. Professor Rodriguez completed his teaching program certification at Texas A&M Commerce, where he would eventually continue his graduate work, earning in 2002 a master's degree in Spanish. Professor Rodriguez completed all of his undergraduate work in Mexico, where he immigrated in 1987. 1987 and 1988 were the crucial years in the political perspective of Professor Rodriguez. 1987, the year of his departure from home, was an election year in Mexico. The following year, here in the United States, was an election year in his new home. These back-to-back events provided him with an added value to his ultimate decision in becoming a new citizen of the United States. He has ever since been highly interested in the political cultures of these two countries, taking political talks and analysis as one of his most beloved hobbies. As always eager to learn and debate the issue that very few of us have direct power to solve. He's a member of the American Council of Teaching Foreign Languages and the American Association of Teachers of Spanish and Portuguese. So at this time, Professor Rodriguez, if you would introduce yourself.
Good morning, everybody. Again, my name is Ulises Rodriguez. You can call me US as President Grant. And as it was mentioned before, I'm the sponsor advisor of the Sigma Delta Mu, the Hispanic Honor Society. Used to be in Mountain View, I guess now it's college level. I also work at Mountain View College. We're celebrating our 50th year. As mentioned, I was born and educated in Mexico, my undergraduate. And of course, we are here celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, and I carry my flag because besides being Hispanic, I'm Mexican. So, and that is me. I'm married to a beautiful Puerto Rican lady, as you can tell. And so that really combines the whole Hispanity in this household. Thank you very much.
All right. So moving on to our next panelist is Professor Cristina Medina. Professor Cristina Medina is a visual artist and professor of art at Mountain View campus, Dallas College. She has earned her Bachelor's of Fine Arts degree at Texas Tech University and a Master's of Fine Arts degree at the University of North Texas. Professor Medina's art has been exhibited nationally in exhibits such as Immigration, Migration, Movement, and the Humanities at Arizona State University, as well as been displayed at the Galleria America of the Institute of Latino Studies, University of Notre Dame, Indiana. Professor Medina has curated several exhibits, including contemporary Latino American artists of the Metroplex at Richland and Brookhaven campuses, and Ella, exhibiting local Latina artists at the Dallas Latino Cultural Center. She was a member of the oldest artist-run cooperative 500X Gallery for 5 years and serves occasionally on the City of Dallas Public Arts Committee. Currently, Professor Medina teaches courses in arts appreciation and drawing and serves as the discipline coordinator for the arts. Professor Medina.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say welcome to our panel discussion, and I'm glad that you're here with us, and this is going to be a really interesting topic to discuss. And if you have any questions, just put them out there. I'm somebody who is a kind of like a social justice, like I try to make artwork about social justice issues. So I'm interested also in the ideas of identity and how we all, as people from different countries who we get labeled, how do we identify ourselves? And that's part of my artwork. So it's really very, it's my research. It's what I deal with on a daily basis, and I think about it all the time. So this is a great topic for everyone to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. All right. Last but not least, and probably my favorite intro, Professor Kat Ruggiero. So again, Professor Kat Ruggiero, I apologize, teaches U.S. history at Eastville campus and Dallas College, and her expertise are in Mexican American history and civil rights. And she identifies as a Chicana. Professor Ruggiero.
Thank you.
Professor.
Yeah, I keep it real short. Just because teaching is my passion. I consider myself an activist. I'm an activist for social justice. You can usually find me out protesting, as long as it's safe and I'm wearing my mask. But I don't know. What else do I want to say? I'm the the faculty advisor for LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens, and I have been for 10 years. I've been a member for 30 years, and it is the oldest Mexican American civil rights organization in the United States. So I encourage our students to join and see what you can do. That's me.
All right. So again, I want to say a huge thank you to all our panelists and everyone else on this call as we begin the program. So to give some framework and context to what we'll be discussing today in terms of, again, the events called Hispanic and Latinx and its terminologies. And we understand by definition, the language, the Spanish language is usually has masculine terms to it. And we understand that some of the things we'll be discussing today will go against the norm or the terminology in which we're used to. So we want to, again, focus in on terminologies and expand out from there. So our first order question before we begin is to first pose it to the audience. Feel free to put it in the chat or something to think about as we begin this presentation. And it is, how do you choose to identify? This is a question in which we want you all to think about as we're going through. Please feel free to feel free to add into the chat how you choose to identify. So panelists, the first order question we want to talk about, and again, expanding and creating our framework for this, is the difference between race, ethnicity, and identity. So Professor Kat, I want to push it out to you first. Could you help us expound this a little bit?
Sure. So, I thought about this topic, and the thing is, this is more of a 3-hour or 3-day or 3-week or 3-month conversation, 3 years. But I'm going to do my best just in a few minutes. and just kind of generalize it, which I really hate doing, but that's kind of what we have to do on presentations like this. So this idea of race, technically, scientifically, there's three, right? Caucasoid, Mongoloid, and Negroid. So that's kind of what we see as white, black, or Asian, period, right? So the problem with that is that's going to cause an intense amount of racism and separation. So I think it was Professor Medina that talked about this idea of teaching just one race, and I believe that 100%, which is the human race, right? But we still tend to identify ourselves within one of those three categories. We're usually black, white, or Asian, whatever. So that's technically race. Ethnicity is a whole other thing. Ethnicity deals more with cultura, your culture, right? Your heritage, language, I don't know, things like that. The way that I always equate it is race is kind of seen as biological. Ethnicity is more culture based, right? Your ancestors, what were they? What, that kind of thing. Identity jumps to who you are. Identity for me means how do you choose to identify yourself? So for me specifically, just a little tiny bit of background. My dad is Spanish from Spain. My mother's Mexican from Mexico. So where do I fall in that? Well, what I discovered in college, in undergrad, is that I choose to identify with my Mexican American side, my mom's side. And the reason for that was very, very deep seated, that I didn't want to be identified as a conqueror, and the Spaniards are conquerors. So I identify with my Aztec roots. So I call myself Chicana, and that's what I will always call myself. And we'll get into terms a lot later in this, but that's pretty much it. That's my idea of the differences between race, ethnicity, and identity.
All right. Professor Medina, would you like to expand on this a little?
Right. We talked about the idea of race when we had to get together to prepare for this presentation. And I believe that those three races were created to segregate people according to class and power. And it was also so that's something I do teach my students is I ask them how many classes or how many races are there? And so they're sitting there counting on their fingers how many races there are. And then I just go to the board and I write human. I say there's one race, the human race. So I believe that those races are not real. We're actually scientifically, we're all one race. So we're humans. So that's where I stand on that. I don't really believe in, but I do also recognize that the rest of the world doesn't think that way. A lot of people really define their identities attached to this idea of race. Ethnicity is something that you think about in terms of maybe your ancestors, where you came from, maybe a certain country. And then identity and culture. And then your identity is what you decide who you are today at this point in time.
Right, thank you. And then Professor Ulises, would you like to still throw some knowledge on it as well?
Sure, and I'm pretty sure I have the same vision. I would agree with Professor Catherine Reguero that there are races scientifically proven. But me approaching it from a language perspective, I focus in my classrooms more into what ethnicity and identity are, because I do have a number of students who are taking Spanish whom are already of Latin American origin. Some of them are even native speakers. So that's the focus that I tend to give. And I do agree that ethnicity has to do more with the culture, and identity has so many other derivations, variations that the students are, for the most part, free to take, and they usually take. But yeah, that's pretty much how all of this is perceived by the whole group of people.
Right. Thank you all for expanding and helping us start our framework. So next up, so the terms in which we'll be discussing today will be Chicano, Chicana, and Chicanx. The term Hispanic, the term Latino, Latina, and also Latinx. So starting off with the first term We want to start with, and Professor Kat, in your bio, you identify as a Chicana. So first, want to start with the first question. What is a Chicana or
So it
Chicano?
so a Chicana in very base terms is just a Mexican American. It is someone of Mexican roots from Mexico that is born in the United States and or naturalized in the United States. They can also be considered. Um, but they tend to have political leanings. They tend to be activists. They tend to um, fight for social justice. That's kind of what a Chicana kind of identifies herself. Otherwise, they tend to use the word Hispanic and or Latina to describe themselves. But Chicana is specific. It was started in California, which is where I'm from, which is why it's close to my heart. It did spread across the Southwest, and there are people in the Southwest that use it. And honestly, in Michigan, it's really big in Michigan because of the farm workers movement out there from the sugar beets. But other than that, it's not really widely used. It's starting to come more into its own. But where I'm from in California, it's big. It was at first a very derogatory term. If you think of the word, the N word that I don't ever say, but when people use this word, they try to say, oh, it's in friendship, it's this, it's that, it's us being colloquial with each other. It's them taking their power away from the people that gave them that name as a negative, as a pejorative word, correct? Well, Chicano, same thing. It was a pejorative word. It was someone from the barrio, from the ghetto, troublemakers, things like that. So it was very hard growing up for me when I discovered that I was a Chicana to convince my relatives around me that I was, because for them that was a negative term. They now understand it and embrace it.
All right. Thank you, Professor Kat. Professor Ulises, I want to switch back to you as well. In regards to Professor Kat speaking that she's hailing from California, and you having some education and roots in Mexico, I want to then switch it over to you in terms of what is Chicano to you, and some of its history and how is it classified.
So the term Chicano is a term that I have never heard until I came to the United States around 87. Uh, and it is a very localized to the United States terminology. I do agree that from what I have heard, the study, et cetera, uh, it began somewhere in California, and it comes from this Chicano word because the Mexicas call themselves like that. So they wanted to find that identity of people who had roots for something. And all of this apparently explodes or is born because I heard comments that it actually began before the 60s. But all of this is born during the civil rights movements that Martin Luther King has on the South, and Deep South, what it's called. But at the same time, oh my goodness, I cannot believe I'm forgetting his name right now. Uh, Professor Reguero, help me out in California. Laborers.
¿Quién?
Cesar
¿César?
Chavez. Thank
¿César?
you.
Sí.
Yeah, Cesar Chavez and other groups take the term, identifying themselves as this group of people, and we go back to what Professor Reguero was talking about, that this ethnicity, this cultural roots that we all have in common, and a whole lot of people start calling themselves that. And yes, eventually takes a negative connotation because yes, it refers to or is being used as if it was for people from the ghettos, because it was from people from the ghettos, as low educated because it was the low educated people who were doing that. That's what the civil rights movement was all about, to remove those barriers, and that's why that it was given that connotation. Up until recently in Mountain View, Ms. Medina and myself, we had certain issues with trying to use that word Chicano, because even though I'm born in Mexico, I do like politics. And as soon as I learned what a Chicano was, what they do, I tried the best of my ability to consider myself Chicano. And yet I had some rejection by some people saying, you were not born here, compadre. And so, but that's pretty much where, from my end of the scope, where it comes from, how it develops, who takes it, why they take it like that, or how we try to take it and use it.
All
Uh,
right.
Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. And then to shift gears to Professor Medina. So what are some of your opinions in regards to the word?
Uh, okay, so where how I grew up, my grandparents came from Mexico, and my parents were born here in Texas, and they they grew up with American kind of. My dad listened to rock and roll, so we didn't grow up with any kind of Spanish music whatsoever. We just listened to a lot of rock and roll, and so growing up, I always felt, but at the same time, I always felt like I was in between, like I was in a weird place, in between space, I guess you could say. And I've heard this term, like it goes, me sentí ne de aquí, ne de allá. But for me, what I feel like, and I did feel like that when I was younger, like in college, like you guys, when I was a college student, I felt really out of place. But today, now, as an older woman, I feel que yo soy de aquí y de allá. Like I feel like I do belong. So there's this feeling of not belonging that I think a lot of the young Mexican Americans during the 50s and the 60s, they felt like they were really belonged to one culture and but they were growing up in another culture. So they had these two cultures together, kind of. They were struggling through, like trying to understand where their place was in both of them. And I really believe that you cannot take one out of the other. Once you're coming from Mexican culture from your parents, it's really ingrained in your life, and then you're also growing up in the United States with American culture. So all these things, you can't, they're like the roots of a plant that grow together. You cannot separate them without destroying something. So I think that Chicano became a term that Americans who had Mexican descent could identify themselves, but also at the same time, they were being discriminated against in their own country of birth, that they were not part of American. They were not American enough. And I bet if they went to Mexico, they were not Mexican enough. So they were trying to find their own identity. And so they chose this term that harks back to their indigenous ancestry. And that's something I'm really, like, I really feel deeply, even though I don't have a lot of my cultural ties have been cut because of assimilation. So assimilation, our parents and grandparents did that so that we could survive. And I think, some of us are here like third generation, or maybe you're first generation or second generation, I don't know, or sixth, I don't know. But I think that a lot of those people were trying to go back to their ancestors, but also make their own identity within this new place, that they wanted to belong to both. And so they made their own term because they didn't want to be associated with the white people who were discriminating against them, but they also knew that they weren't Mexican anymore. So what do we do? So they made their own kind of identity.
It's starting
If
to
I
feel
can
like.
just, sorry, if I could just add to that really quickly,
Yes, ma'am.
because that's exactly what so many of our students go through. It has a name. It's actually called Nepantla, which means in between.
Yes.
Right. So it's a Nahua word, Nahuatl, the original Aztec language. It is their word of saying that I'm in the middle, that maybe it's also the negative term, and I hesitate to even say this word, but it's what I was called growing up, and that is a coconut, that I am brown on the outside, but I was white on the inside. Right.
There's
It's a horrible term.
the pocha.
Yes, La Pocha. I was called La Guarita, little white girl. So yes, this caught in between. There's studies on it. There's art on it. There's social movements around it. But this becomes a huge part of the Chicano movement. Is Napantla, is this idea of being caught in between, and I don't want to identify with the whites that are oppressing me and that are stigmatizing me, and I'm being rejected by Mexico, by the Mexican people, because I'm not Mexican enough. I don't speak Spanish. I wasn't raised that way. Spanish for me was taken away when I was very, very young. It became mom and dad's language. It was their private language, right? So I had to learn it all over again when I was an adult. So that's Nepantla.
So first, I want to say thank you all for opening up and bringing this wealth of knowledge. I would say this feels like a history class, but you all are history professors. So It's just a natural feeling. And then to shift gears a little bit, and so we're then going to move to the next term on the phrase is the term Hispanic. So when someone says Hispanic, what is it? Where did it originate from? And what is classified as an Hispanic? So Professor Ulysses, if you can bring us in, that would be a good start.
All right. Well, the term Hispanic is born from the Spaniard who came to conquer America. At one point in time, they want to include everybody, and they use this term Hispanic that is born from a long time ago. In fact, it begins as Hispania or Hispania, the land of the rabbit. That's what the Romans consider what today is Spain. And as time developed, España is born out of Hispania, but because of its spelling, which in Latin it didn't use an H, because of its spelling, the term Hispanic in English is born. And at the conclusion, or what it seemed, it appeared to be the conclusion of the Civil Rights Fight, the U.S. government wanted to categorize all these groups that they were going to give all those civil rights, and they needed to include all those who spoke Spanish, but that were not necessarily of Mexican origin. And that's when somebody at the census did what I would consider a good research, and he comes up with the term they are Hispanic, and the only one commonality was that they all spoke Spanish. That's why the term refers to España. There are some people, because in Latin America, we're educated to perceive, as Professor Reguero was stating, the Spaniard is the oppressor. And so there's a lot of people who don't really want to be called themselves Hispanic, because like Professor Reguero mentioned, then I will be perceived as the oppressor. But that's where the term comes from. And personally, when I came to the United States, there's a phrase in Mexico, they say something similar to whatever, when in Rome, as the Romans, something like that. And so when I came here, if the U.S. government decided that I would be Hispanic, by all means, I will be Hispanic to you. Deep inside, I know that I'm Latino, a Latinoamericano, but most importantly, I'm Mexicano. And so that's where the term is coined. That's where it comes from. Here in the United States, that's where it originated in the census. It classifies all of those who speak Spanish in general. That eliminates or segregates our Brazilian brothers and sisters. And that's pretty much what Hispanic comes to be up until today. Important for this conversation to know that Hispanic, because it's an English word, it does not have a gender.
All right. So shifting gears, so Professor Kat, could you share with us some of your opinions on the word Hispanic, on the term itself?
Oh man. That's the one kind of minefield I didn't want to get into. I really don't like it. In studying the civil rights, so my expertise, my background, and what I teach my students is Mexican American civil rights. And that is El Movimiento, which is the Mexican American civil rights movement, kind of paralleled the African American civil rights movement. And there are many, many reasons why they went their own directions, but not going to get into that. This isn't a history lesson. However, I will say for me personally, the way I see it, and it's why I don't use the word, we call it the H word, because a lot of people, especially one generation before me, would use Hispanic in order to separate themselves from Mexico, because Mexicans were considered lower than. They were dirty. They were taking jobs. They were this or that. So in calling yourself Hispanic, you are taking out the Mexican part of you. That's just kind of, like I said, it's kind of an umbrella. It's a very broad way of saying it, but basically that's why it's called the Spanish myth. And this idea that I'm not from Mexican roots, I'm Spanish, and they're better, they're European, they're this or that. So I've always despised the word Hispanic. I don't use it. If I don't call myself Chicana for whatever reason, I'm a Latina, and that's just kind of how I identify.
All right. Thank you for that. And then again, because I noticed the chat feature currently going on, so as our audiences in the audience, we ask that you continue to use the chat feature to share your opinions and thoughts on the topics as we're going through it. And speaking of which, Professor Medina, as another term that is broadly used in some capacity in regards to of identity and also ethnicity, is the word Latino and Latina. I wanted to start with you first, Professor Medina, in regards to what is again a Latino, Latina, and how do you identify with that? How?
Latino, it's kind of a term that was, I'm also learning about it still, but it's something like Professor Rodriguez said, that he considers himself a Latino because he's from Latin America. And Latino, my understanding of it was, before that comment, was that it was more of like a term that's used by the census of the United States, just like the term Hispanic, and that Hispanic changed into Latino, so that they could, I think that they were having maybe issues with, people identifying as Hispanic, so they had to switch. So I feel like it's like a term that is used to be all-encompassing of many different people who speak Spanish, but there's some issues with that, some problematic issues with like who you consider to be Latino, in regards to probably ethnicity, language, and the country that they're from. So, but I think it was something that was created by the government of the United States to kind of get a census of who is living in the United States. I think probably that's why it was created. And my opinions on it are that it's a term that I would accept. Like, that's one I used. I definitely am in agreement with Professor Rivero in saying that I don't identify as Hispanic, but I would definitely more say so that I'm Latina. And so it kind of makes sense in that regard, but I think there are other issues behind it that probably the other professors could probably speak more about.
And yes, we'll shift gears. And last question in regards to your area of expertise. When it comes to art and some paintings and things of that nature, how is the term used in terms of, could you speak a little to how it's used in terms of ownership and classification when it comes to art?
Yeah, that's another, it's really funny because that's the same thing. So artists are termed all the different terms. So I will have someone who will come to me and say, do you want to be in a Hispanic art show? And then another venue might come and say, do you want to be in a Latino or a Latinx, art show? And then another one say, we're having a Chicana art show. So those terms are always interchangeably used all over the place by different people. And as an artist, you kind of just have to say, I have to say specifically, okay, yes, I'm all of them. And in fact, I used to put that in my artist statement. I used to say, I am a Latina, Hispanic, Mexican American, Chicana, American. I used to put all the terms because, yes, I'm basically, if we want to just say that, yeah, we're all of them, whether they're misnamed or not, or maybe the history of them is not so good. People still refer to us as all these names. But it's also it's kind of humorous to me because we have all these labels placed on us, and it's humorous and a little bit confounding, like a little bit frustrating to have all these terms placed on us. Does that answer your question?
It does. Sorry. And I'll shift gears to Professor Ulysses, because you're next up in regards, in regards to talk a little bit about like your opinions on the word and some origins of it.
So one of the things that we were talking the other day was about the term Latino and how it's perceived here in the United States from only this one scope, as if it was where it was created. And there's a couple of questions on the chat that I've been taking notes.
Mm-hmm.
In Latin America, especially if we were born down there, there's a question. I always identify myself as white. Because in Latin America, that's what we are described. We don't see that discrepancy of ethnic groups or even races. Everybody is white because that's what the Spaniards told us to be. It becomes one of those cultural things that we grow up being. We're all white in Latin America. And eventually, whenever we come to the States, then there is all this segregation into all those different groups. And that's why we have this identity issue of what are we. So in Latin America, we are Latinos, and the main commonality is that we speak languages that come from Latin. That's when we include the Brazilian brothers and sisters. That's where they come in. So it is one whole Latin America. That's what it distinguishes. Now, here in the United States, how it's being used, I would like to mention what Professor Medina was saying. There are certain things that are done here that I disagree strongly with them, like the fact that the dictionaries pick up words instead of having established rules of what things mean. The same thing happens with the census. So when the census started back in the, I believe it was in the 70s or late 60s, using the word Hispanic, then eventually the word Latino came up. Because the census, they have this option for other. And so there were people who said, I'm not Hispanic, I'm Latino. And so there were so many responses with Latino that the census says, well, maybe the term isn't Hispanic, maybe it says Latino. And that's why they included the word Latino. The same happened, by the way, with all ethnic groups. The census keeps expanding, because those are the most popular answers to the census. But that's, and like I said at the beginning, that's how I identify myself. I'm a Latino, well, of course I'm Mexican, then I'm Latino, and if for government purposes you want me to be Hispanic, I'll be Hispanic, but deep inside I know who I am.
All right, thank you. And then, so speaking to that question, in the comments that Professor Cat first seemed to attack, it was Hispanic. The question is coming from Miguel, and the question is Hispanic and Spaniards. Are they the same? Do they have the same meanings? And Professor Cat, could you expand a little bit on your answer?
So basically, I was just kind of explaining that yes, a Spaniard, a person that identifies as a Spaniard, is a Hispanic, but a Hispanic is not necessarily a Spaniard. They can be all different Spanish-speaking nations, so they don't have to be from Spain. Spaniard just means you are from Spain, which is what my dad is. My dad is a Spaniard, calls himself Hispanic. He's actually turned to now because he sees a little bit more value in using that word. So my dad is now Latino. He calls himself Latino. Is he Latino? Okay, yeah, sure. That kind of comes to identity, right? That's kind of what we were talking about before. You make your choice. I am never going to disparage you for whatever you want to call yourself. It's a matter of respect. If I want to be called a Chicana, you should call me a Chicana. If you want to be called Hispanic, I will call you Hispanic, and I will have no problem with it. That's the whole point of it. Right? Identity is yourself. Identify for yourself. Don't let someone else tell you how to identify. I personally, like I said, identify with my Aztecs. I research them. I embrace them. I learn about that part of my cultura. Whereas the Spaniards, not so much. Just again, I don't identify with this whole idea of conquest and being forced and all this kind of stuff. So that's the difference.
So let me expand on the term again, the same terminology, the Spaniard versus the Hispanic. Again, my approach comes from the language perspective. So Spaniard is an adjective of nationality. Only people born in Spain are considered Spaniards. In fact, my kidney twists one way and then to the other side before it comes back to normal when I heard that such person is Spanish. Spanish is an adjective that describes things, not nationalities. And the term Hispanic, like Professor Reguero was mentioning earlier, it defines all your array of culture. It comes from family, from your surroundings, from your religion, etc., etc. All of that is what determines Hispanity. But Spaniard, definitely, you have, from the language perspective, you have to be born in Spain to consider yourself Spaniard.
All right, thank you. And then to the point, as we're now shifting, one of the things that was brought up, again, we're talking about race as well as identity. And one of the more recent terms, or wouldn't say necessarily recent, but one of the more terms that's got some more recent traction is, what does Latinx mean to you? So the term Latinx. First, we want to open up to our audience again to think about this word. Like, what does Latinx mean to you? Is this a new word in which you've heard? And some thoughts about that. Please continue, please, to put your answers in our chat, as well as raise your hand if you have questions or would like to speak to the panel as well. So starting off with Professor Cat, the term Latinx, how is it pronounced? And can you talk a little bit about some of its origins?
Okay, so let's see, let my camera, because I want you to see how animated I am about this. So let me put the camera on. This is like my jam. I love talking about Latinx. So you can pronounce it Latinx or Latinx, whatever you want to do. But I really wanted to see some of the responses from students before I ever got into this. So if I can wait just a couple seconds here and see if they type anything, tell me what Latinx is. What is it? Why are we using it?
So
Come
again,
on.
our audience, please put your answers in the chat feature. Also, feel free to. I can't wait to talk. Okay, I can't wait to talk about Latinx. That's your comments. But again, feel free to unmute yourself at this point to also hear your thoughts about it, and to our other listeners as well. Because again, the whole. All right, I thought so. We have a comment from Professor Liz Nichols. I thought it was because the X can be male or female.
Okay.
All right. All right. So anyone else, again, feel free to unmute your mic, or again continue to put in the terms in the description some of your thoughts on the words. Okay. Another one, because there are different countries involved. So my guess would be the X is everything. Okay.
So Maite, is it? And Shani? I'm sorry if I'm butchering your names, but you're
Shanae.
exactly right. So
Okay.
Latinx is to be more inclusive, is to create equity, because what we realize and what we're acknowledging is not everyone is born male or female. I mean, sorry, they don't identify as male or female, right? They identify as other, and that's perfectly fine. But if you're calling someone a Latino, then you're saying, well, two things. I'm sorry. Let me break it down just one more step. And that is, it has two purposes. And the first one is that the Spanish language, which we discussed way earlier, inherently is masculine. It's a patriarchal language. And so let's say you have a group of teachers, okay? And they are all male. They're hanging out together. They are maestros, okay? Those are your teachers. If you have a group and there's 3 female teachers and a male teacher, guess what? They're maestros. If you have a group of all female teachers, they're maestras. So where do you fall in there? Number one, if you're not a male or a female identified person, and number two, why does the one male in a group get to take over the whole the whole meaning of it, right? I'm no longer a group of maestras. We're maestros because we have one male. So the X in it says that this idea of being a predominantly male language shouldn't be, that you need to find other ways to do that, to be inclusive. And so Latinx was created for that reason. Chicanx as well, which we'll get into later. But the point being is that this is not in the Spanish dictionary. Let me just say that right now. They do not acknowledge the X. And a lot of people, unfortunately, the vast majority of Latinos in the nation do not accept the word. I believe it is 3 or 6% that actually accept the word and use the word. So a lot of questions that my students tell me is, so do I have to call myself Latinx in order to be an ally? No, you do not. But what you do is you refer to the group as Latinx in order to be inclusive. So in other words, I myself am a Latina or a Chicana. But when I'm talking about a group of Latinos and Latinas, they are Latinx. Does that make sense?
It does to me. Again, I'm
Okay.
taking this is a history lesson for me, so I'm definitely taking notes on this. And then again, as everyone continues to put in the chat, I want to remind you all that during this month for Hispanic and Latinx History Month, This team site will be where most of the events will be hosted on, and all the presentations you are able to come back and have access to it. And also our recording, all our events will also be recorded. So again, if you need some more time to digest this, because again, this should not be the only time in the month or time of the year in which learning is occurring. So then to talk a little bit more to our Mountain View professors, in terms of Latinx, what are some of your experiences in dealing with this generation in regards to the student population? Professor, oh, I'm sorry, I just blanked.
Yeah.
Professor Ulises, would you like to take that first, or Professor Medina, would you like to approach that as well?
I can talk a little bit about it in terms of that term, or when I'm interacting with the students, there's no because I'm an art professor. There's no really. I used to teach classes where I did art appreciation with an emphasis in Mexican American studies, and I haven't done that in a few years, so I'm not having those same conversations. So this term in particular is very new, and but when I do have conversations, like one thing that I had with Professor Rodriguez, we were trying to create a club together at Mountain View because our population, the ethnic population at our school is like 60%. Hispanic, Latino, whatever, Chicano, whatever have you. And so we were trying to create a club like that. But there was a lot of confusion about that term when we used the word Latinx. But we were using it because we did want to be inclusive. However, the students were not familiar with the term, so they didn't understand. Some of them were maybe turned off by it. They didn't understand what it was for. And they thought maybe the X was about being LGBTQ. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. So they thought maybe that was for a different type of people than they were. And then there were some people who would come up to me and say, wow, that sounds really interesting. What is it? Like they didn't know what it was. So these were the students. But we do want to be really inclusive because I do have a lot of students who are Latino, Latina, but especially Latinx, because I have a lot of transgender students. I have students who they want to be identified as a different gender than what they were born with. So that is something that I think is useful, is to use this term, but I do think it's very new and there's misunderstandings about what it means. Yeah, non-binary. Thank you.
And then Professor Rodriguez, you have your hands up, so I want to shift to you.
Oh, yeah, let me lower it. So yeah, like Tina Medina was saying, I did not hear the term Latinx until about 14 months ago, for the first time ever. Despite the fact that the term has been in existence since 2004, more or less. And so when I hear it, I did the research kind of quick because I needed to open up the club. I talked it over with Medina. What I researched was what Professor Reguero is mentioning. It is just the removal of I like the word you used the other day, patriarchy of the Spanish language. And I did like it. And I said, okay, let's go. But as time went on, I was having difficulty recruiting students. And we discovered that was part of the problem, that it was confused with the LGBTQ. And within everything, we have to remember part of the heritage, part of the ethnicity that Latinos, Chicanos, everybody who considers themselves, they are very, very patriarchal. Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, we're very patriarchal, we're very macho. And so that brings certain dislike for the word. They reject the word, and also, and this is a personal opinion that I developed by reading and preparing for this thing. I found a couple of writings that right now I cannot quote because I couldn't find them again. It might have to do with the fact that it's being imposed on people. Like, for example, on myself, and mind you that my negative approach to the word Latinx, it comes more from the language perspective than from a personal identity perspective. Because I teach language, I teach Spanish, I don't teach Spanglish, I teach Spanish, and Spanish has very specific rules. That's my rejection for the term. Nevertheless, when it comes to the terms that we are going to use to describe people, we have, the term Hispanic that it was imposed upon people, and now they have the Latinx that is being imposed upon people. And I found a couple of writings that they say, why am I being called what you want to call me? Why can I not pick? Back in the day when the coordinating board allowed us to teach, I could teach literature and culture, and there was studies, can't remember the name of the courses that I was teaching. This was part of the subject. And one of the things that I told them is, we are going to lay down here the terms. This is what they mean, and pick the one that you want to be described as. If you want to be described as a Chicano, Latino, Mexicano. To my surprise, most of our students, as it happened also in the chat I was looking at, most of our students, the younger generations, describe themselves or identify themselves by nationality rather than by any of the groups that exist here. And yet, I want to reinforce, because just like Professor Reguero, I'm not an activist like you are, but I do have my political opinions and participations when I can. That we should conform a group that is solid and vast, so we can be taken care of. Like voting, like the census. Regardless of you calling yourself Mexican or Hispanic or Latino or even Latinx. That's my take on the Latinx word.
All right. Thank you for that, Professor Ulises. And then to open up briefly, because again, I want to say thank you all for your time and effort, and even granted to our audience as well. Were there any questions in which any audience member had and wanted to pose to the panel, or any discussions any audience member wanted to bring up as well? And as that goes by, one of the things we want to make sure you think about is now knowing and now having received this presentation and this discussion, how do you choose to identify? And this is one of the terms that we want to make sure that throughout this entire month and past this, that our audience and students also get a chance to really think about what this means to you as an individual and how that can impact the way you see the world and continue to grow. So one of the comments we see here is, I just want to say, please register to vote if you are eligible. Professor Katz, okay, I definitely see that for sure. And this is definitely something that we want to encourage our students to continue to do. And some of our programming for this month is actually catered to that as well. As things are coming up, we will continue to give out information in terms of voting location in regards to our campus, our college, and sites and how it can affect us as a whole. So real quick, I want to first give a huge shout out to our panelists. And I want to first start with closing arguments or closing remarks. So first I want to start with Professor Ulises, and then we'll go Professor Medina, and then we'll close with Professor Katz.
So as a closing remark, just don't forget the census. Yes, first vote, and also do not forget the census. We have only 9 days left on the census. Remember, we need to be a group that is remembered, that makes a mark, whether you choose by nationality, Latinx, let's be just one solid group, please.
All right. Professor Medina?
Oh, sorry. Yes, I just want to say that whatever term that you see, you can identify with whatever term is appropriate for you and what you feel comfortable with. And it will change. It's going to change again. I don't know, but it's part of who you are, what your culture is, and if you just sometimes I think, when are we going to become Americans and not this American? You know what I mean? But at the same time, I also think about in terms of culture and how beautiful my ancestry is, and how I wish I had more cultural ties. And so it's different for everybody. Some people are more like, well, I'm American, fine. And some people are like, no, I'm Mexican, even though I wasn't born in Mexico and I've never, I've only been there 2 times. Whatever you feel comfortable identifying with, that's going to be your decision. And you don't, you can always, hold that for yourself in the special place as your identity.
All right. Thank you. Professor Kat?
I agree with everything that was said. Identity is yours. The only thing that I don't want to say disagree with, but it's just not my viewpoint, is that I don't call myself American, because I do have my culture. I do have my heritage. I'm incredibly proud of it. And so it will always be a part of my title, a part of who I am. So Mexican, American, Chicana, whatever you want to call me, it's definitely not just an American. And that's just me. But what I do want to say, as far as voting and the census and all these kind of things, what I want you to understand is that historically, in the United States, Latinos have been the minority, period. That's just the way it works, right? And minorities don't have power. They just don't. It's just the way that politics work, right? However, by 2045, and that is around the corner, I'm sorry, but that is right around the corner. 2045, Latinos will be the majority in the United States. That should equate to power. That should equate to changes being made, right? That are going to benefit all of the United States, but also La Raza, our gente, right? So please, please, please take that seriously. Please vote. Please count yourself in the census, and please choose to identify yourself the way that makes you comfortable. Don't ever let someone put you in a box, okay? You're not a box. You're a person, and you have an identity, and you get to form that. That's all.
And thank you to our panelists. I'm going to read one final comment from our audience. And it says, I would like to thank you all for attending. I often ask myself some of these questions growing up. Am I a light-skinned Latina? And people often refer to me as white. At one point during my freshman year, I asked my mom if I could buy an ancestry test because I wanted to know why I was why I was so pale. She told me, never forget that you are Mexican. Just because you were born here doesn't mean you don't have Mexico running through your veins. And again, to re-echo everything that our panelists is saying, was a huge thank you to you all. And as you use these terms and use this presentation to learn and grow on your own self-identity. So going up, we have been talking a little bit about the census and some upcoming events for Hispanic and Latinx Heritage Month. So at noon on September 23rd, we have our next event coming up, which is our Latin dance lessons. So this is our virtual workout from your own personal space, in which on this exact team site, there will be a Zumba lesson happening. You do not have to turn on your screen, but we ask that you be part of this event as well. Next up on the 9th, we have our event at noon, which is our COVID, race, and census. Again, talking more about registering for the census and filling out the census. You can definitely catch Professor Ulysses again at this event. Following that same day, we have your do-it-yourself Pinata on IG Live, and that's going to be hosted by our sister campuses, Brookhaven as well as Mountain View. You can follow them on Instagram. As well, we're going to have our last event for that evening, which will be at 7:30, which is our live Chicana performing artist, Christian Cruz. Again, this will also be on IG Live, and this is going to be at our Eastfield Arts. Again, we ask that you take your time to be part of one of these events or more, and you can find the full range of events at dccd.edu/HLM months. Again, we want to say a huge thank you to all our participants and our audience. And please know you were able to access this presentation and we'll be able to access this recording again on this team site. But thank you all for your time today and have a great rest of your day and Hispanic Heritage Month.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Sir.